Hi, peeps. You're listening to She's My Cherry Pie, the baking podcast from the Cherry Bomb Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jessie Sheehan. I'm a baker, recipe developer, and author of 4 baking books, including Salty, Cheesy, Herby, Crispy, Snackable Bakes. On each episode, I hang out with the sweetest bakers around and take a deep dive into their signature bakes. Today's guest is JR Ryall, the head pastry chef at Ballymaloe House, a luxury property in Cork County, Ireland. While it's a separate entity from the famed Ballymaloe Cookery School, it is right next door and owned by the same family. JR is also the author of the 2022 cookbook, Ballymaloe Desserts. He started working at Ballymaloe when he was a teenager and was entrusted with the dessert menu at just 21 years old. He's also staged at other prestigious places like the River Cafe in London and Chez Panisse in Berkeley. His baking focuses on sourcing local, high-quality ingredients, and his creations are rooted in traditional Irish flavors with contemporary techniques and global influences. JR is hands down one of the most delightful conversationalists, and we had such a fun time chatting about his life at Ballymaloe, including the fateful first time he visited when he was only 4 years old, the bread baking class he took there when he was a young teenager, and the incredible Ballymaloe vintage dessert trolley, or cart, that he fills with a daily array of seasonally inspired treats and baked goods for lunch and dinner at the house. He also walks me through his recipe for chocolate éclairs from his book, and it was such a treat to learn his tips for crispy choux pastry, how he lightens his pastry cream, and how to make a chocolate glaze that is shiny, not too sweet, and almost a little chewy. If you know, you know. You don't want to miss our chat, so stay tuned. You can find today's recipe at cherrybomb.com. Today's episode is sponsored by Ghirardelli Professional Products. When it comes to your craft, only the best will do. That's why professional recipe developers, like myself, trust products from Ghirardelli, America's oldest continuously operating chocolate manufacturer. The Ghirardelli difference starts at the source. They select the finest cocoa beans from specific regions, and they roast only the heart of the bean for a richer and more consistent flavor. Their chocolate is meticulously refined to ensure a creamy texture, and then it goes through hours of conching to reduce moisture and drive off bitter notes. All of this results in a velvety, smooth, flavorful chocolate like no other. I love using Ghirardelli products like the coating wafers, which make dipping and coating super easy peasy, whether you're covering strawberries or making pedophores. And their sweet ground powders are perfect for baking as well as beverages. So all you professional and at-home baristas can whip up specialty coffees like marvelous mochas and other treats. And then, when it comes to chocolate chips, they have 8 varieties from semi-sweet to milk to bittersweet. And for you pastry chefs, they have couverture options and offer their products in convenient 5-pound bags. So whatever you need, they have an option for you. To learn more about Ghirardelli Professional Products and request samples, visit ghirardelli.com/professional. You can also find their products at U.S. Chef Store, Restaurant Depot, Webstaurant, and even Amazon. Or request them via your food service distributor. Now is the perfect time to upgrade your bakes with premium ingredients. I have a special treat for those of you who will be at Jubilee in New York City on Saturday, April 12th. Ghirardelli will be there, and you'll get to try their delicious products for yourself. Meet some of your favorite bakers and dessert folks, and enter to win a fantastic sweepstakes. I'll be at Jubilee all day, and I can't wait to see you there. Cherry Bomb's next issue is all about love, and I think you're going to love the cover. It features Ilona, Olivia, and Adriana Marr, the sister trio that has won everyone's hearts for their positive message of confidence and self-love. The issue is full of joyful stories and recipes. To snag a copy, head to cherrybomb.com or click the link in our show notes, or visit your favorite bookstore or culinary shop to pick up an issue. Let's chat with today's guest. JR, so excited to have you on She's My Cherry Pie and to talk Éclairs with you and so much more.
Yes, thank you, Jessie. I'm delighted to be here. It's always a treat to get to New York, and I've been a follower of yours in Cherry Bomb for the longest time and a huge fan. So thank you very much for the invitation.
I want to begin with one of my favorite JR stories that you've told, which is the story of your Aunt Evelyn, who worked at Ballymaloe and brought you there to tour it, to sort of see where she worked when you were only 4 years old. So tell us what transpired when JR was 4 years old.
So to set the scene, I was born in the late 80s in Ireland, in County Cork. And at that time, one of Ireland's chefs, Darina Allen, had a television show called Simply Delicious, and it was my favourite thing to watch. So instead of cartoons, my mother would put on Darina's show, and I'd watch her make a fruit cake or a sorbet or stud a leg of lamb with garlic. I thought this was amazing. So when I was 4, I was into the show so much. My mother mentioned it to Evelyn, my aunt, who worked at the cookery school that Darina Allen ran. So this is a cookery school on a 100-acre organic farm in East County Cork. So Evelyn said, come ahead. So I spent an afternoon going around the gardens, the farm, through the cookery school buildings, the kitchens where the students cook. And then at the end of the tour, Evelyn introduced me to Darina. This was the first time I was starstruck. And very kindly, Darina gifted me a copy of her cookbook. The book was called Simply Delicious. It was her first cookery book, a soft cover with a grey border and a photo of herself on it. And she put a note inside the cover saying, for JR, who will be a great chef when he grows up, love Darina Allen, March 1992. So this is 33 years ago, but it really sowed a seed. And ever since that day, I found Darina, her approach, her message, the whole Ballymaloe thing very aspirational. So that really encouraged me to want to be a cook.
I've read that you said your mom was a fine baker, nothing against your mom, good baker, but she was no Aunt Evelyn. She wasn't at that sort of stage or at that sort of enthusiasm for it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, my mother was a very good home cook, and we ate at home all the time.
Yep.
We would eat in a restaurant just a couple of times a year, though I longed for it. I dreamt of the food that I could imagine was in restaurants and all to come down the line. But no, my mother cooked very traditional, what you'd call farm food.
Yep.
You know, back in the day when even our desserts, as much as they were for pleasure, they were also for sustenance.
Yeah.
Because, you know, on a farm, you work outside. My mother was outside working. When my father was home, he'd be working on the farm. He had a job away as well. And then we'd have people who'd give a hand. And, you know, you come in for a meal and you'd need the calories.
Yeah.
So it was back in the day where you'd have a sponge cake, but actually it was as important a part of the meal as everything else. So my mother cooked these lovely traditional meals that were, you know, very healthy. There was no extravagance to it. Yeah,
And there
very
wasn't-
pragmatic cookery.
It wasn't like I hate that word foodie, but it wasn't like a foodie family where everyone's talking about food all the time and thinking about it, because it's you need the food in order to do the job, which is where the focus is.
Yeah, I think we took for granted how good the food was without ever speaking about it a lot of the time. We're very lucky. We had a few chickens, the eggs were fresh. The butter, you know, the butter you buy in Ireland is so wonderful. So, you know, there's always a pound of Kerrygold on the table. And now when you realise what's in other parts of the world, you realise how good we had it.
Yeah.
The quality of the flour was great, access to fresh vegetables. So we ate very simply, but very well.
Yeah.
And, you know, we weren't sick that often as children, but there weren't too many packets coming in the door either. You know, so almost the exotic I was dreaming of. But yeah, we didn't really get it. Yeah.
So at around 13 years old, I think it was maybe even your 13th birthday or maybe it was your 14th birthday, your mom bought you a 2.5-day like Ballymaloe bread class. You were the only young person in the group. I think it was probably full of grown-ups. You stayed with Aunt Evelyn, of course. And it was after that course that Darina invited you to work at Ballymaloe. The rest is kind of history. But tell us about that class and how brave you were to go and be with all those grown-ups.
So this was a dream come true because the years leading up to this, I would make anything my mother would allow me to. And yesterday, somebody asked me, how did I decide to be a pastry chef? And then I said to them, actually, it was sort of chosen for me. When you're very young and you want to cook, it's seldom someone will hand you a chicken to roast, you know, or ask you to prepare a tagine, but they'll say make cakes and cookies. So I'd been practicing this genre of baking for years at home, you know, just based on the recipes I could get from a magazine or from, you know, my first baking book, that sort of thing. So when Mum suggested I could do this course at Ballymaloe, I was like, wow, this is the door I want to walk through. And having seen Ballymaloe and had that seed sown so young, like getting there was really the most excited I'd been about anything at that time. So I did the 2.5-day course. They made an exception. It wasn't a kids course. So everyone else was over 18. But Evelyn kindly explained to the school, look, JR is so into this, can we? And she actually did the course with me. They said, look, yeah, you know, we think this will work better. And at the end of the 2.5 days, I was just like, my eyes were widened. I saw things that I had never imagined. just watching how the farm filtered into the cookery school, there was magic in the air. And it's a feeling I've never forgotten. And during that time, I met a few people who'd go on to become very important mentors for me. So it was more than just the recipes in the course. I met Myrtle Allen. She was the founder of Ballymaloe. She'd be 101 this year. She was still alive. I met Rory O'Connell, the head chef of Ballymaloe House at the time, who teaches at the cookery school, Hazel Allen. And little did I know the influence these 2.5 days were, going to have on the next 20 years.
Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. Peeps, have you heard about Cherry Bomb's Jubilee? It's our annual conference for women in food, drink, and hospitality, and it's happening Saturday, April 12th in New York City. I always love being at Jubilee and connecting with other bakers, pastry chefs, and cookbook authors. If you'd like to join us, you can get tickets at cherrybomb.com. If you're an official Bomb Squad member, check your inbox for special member pricing. I hope to see you there. Now back to our guest. Can you describe your baking style for us? Ballymaloe influences you and you influence it, but what would you say your style is?
Yeah, my style is very simple. It's seasonally led, and the approach is to never overlook what's around you. So when I'm in Ballymaloe, I look at what's there. In midsummer, first there'll be gooseberries, strawberries, if we're lucky, the first raspberries. And then those things are really what you have to work with. That's the palette. And then the cooking is the painting the picture bit. So usually we'll pair things gently in a way that each flavour generally sits on its own. So raspberries might go into a raspberry almond tart, two flavours that work well together. Nothing else is needed. Or strawberries might literally be tossed with sugar and lemon juice as a dessert to pair with ice cream. And all of these things go onto a dessert trolley. And so the style is very much of a country house. It's very simple home cooking, kind of elevated, but really it's all about the produce.
Tell us a little bit more about Ballymaloe for those that might not know. You said it's in County Cork, Ireland. People have called it like the birthplace of the modern Irish cuisine.
Ballymaloe, the name comes from the Irish language and it translates to land of the sweet honey. So that in itself is, I suppose, quite fitting in many ways. Ballymaloe is a farm, and in the middle of the farm, there's an old house, the oldest part dating back 500 years. The newest part, the paint is still drying. And in the house, there's a restaurant and there's bedrooms. We call it a small hotel in Ireland. By American standards, it would be, you might think of it as an inn. So this is somewhere you can come and stay, have a long, leisurely breakfast, and dinner is the speciality of the day where people will come and have a long dinner with friends or family, and it's a real occasion to celebrate. And in the restaurant, the menus are based on the produce that's available on the farm, the locality, and we prepare a new menu for every day. So really what we think of as farm to table. And it opened in 1964, so predates most of the properties internationally that we think of who have a similar approach. For anyone listening in the US, Chez Panisse was founded in the early 70s. So, to put it in context, this predates what was going on here. So the idea that an Irish farmer's wife, Myrtle Allen, at age 40 with 5 children, would open a small restaurant in her home. This was really eccentric stuff at the time, but it worked. So that's what Ballymaloe was in the beginning. And then people would come from far and wide to eat this very simple food in a setting where it felt like it belonged. And then people wanted to learn how to make it. So Doreen Allen, Myrtle's daughter-in-law, then established the Ballymaloe Cookery School on a nearby farm that her and her husband had. The farms are just about 2 miles from one another. And on the Cookery School farm, which started in 1983, they began just with one classroom. And now, over the last 40 years, the school has grown to be an international institute of forgotten skills. You can learn how to milk a cow and sow a seed and make compost. You can learn how to glaze a gâteau bativier, fillet a fish and catch the fish. Everything from cheese making to recipe writing. The 3-month cookery course that's run at Ballymaloe covers all of that. So it's become a bit of a destination. Lots of people come from the US. And on any one of these courses, there's 67 students. There could be 15 or more nationalities. So the whole Ballymaloe world has gone from being something that was so hyper-local to grasping curiosity of people around the world. And then there's other little side businesses too. We feed into farmers markets. There's a farm shop where locals can come and get the produce from the glasshouse, all organic, of course. and lots of other things. Yeah, we love to jump into a project. And actually, one of the things we're doing this year, if anyone fancies a holiday, come to Ireland in May. We're going to have the Ballymaloe Festival of Food, and we invite our cook friends from all around the world. They're going to come, and it's really great fun. So we do a lot of things.
So is the old house where I read that everyone called Myrtle Mrs. Allen?
Yes.
Yes, is where Mrs. Allen started. Is that where the more fancy restaurant is now?
Yes. Yeah. So that was sort of her golden egg. So Ballymaloe House was Myrtle's house in the middle of the farm that she and her husband were running. And when she wanted to open a restaurant, in those days, people opened restaurants in cities. But Ivan, her husband, said, Myrtle, I'd love you to open a restaurant, but we'll have to do it here in the house. So the idea, this whole thing now we see the story, people commercialise these houses. It's a very valid way of holding on to them, making a living. Wasn't really the done thing at the time. The restaurant that Myrtle started is in Ballymaloe House itself, in this wonderful ancient property.
Can you tell people about the vintage dessert trolley?
Yes. So I suppose what we're used to these days in restaurants is often, comes to the end of the meal, the dessert menu goes down and people think, oh, will we share a slice of cake between the six of us? It's a different story in Ballymaloe. Since the day the restaurant opened, we have a dessert trolley, or some people might call it a dessert cart, and it'll go from table to table in the restaurant. And if we have 100 guests for dinner, we serve 100 desserts. Everybody gets their own plate. And this isn't a way of trying to stuff people or overfeed them. They can have as little or as much as they like. And every night, there's always 5 desserts in the trolley that change, and one that's always there. The one that's always there is called Carrageen Moss Pudding, a very special, iconic Ballymaloe dessert. It's a seaweed set milk. And if anyone's really interested, you'll find a lovely story on that in the book. But the other desserts, there's always something frozen. It could be an ice cream, a sorbet, a bomb. Think, all the things in that category. Always something like a pastry or a cake. So it could be something as simple as an open apple tartlet, a chocolate choux bun, or some sort of gâteau. Then there's always a meringue dessert. We use lots of egg yolks in our desserts. Egg white is a surplus, and many people might decide to discard them, but we always make meringue. So they could be baked soft centre, layered in a cake, made into a gâteau margarine, all these different things. Always something fruity. Could be a compote, fresh fruit, little tower of strawberries or cherries, whatever's coming off the garden. And then always something moussey. So they're the 5 categories. We move the desserts around every day.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah. And you can try them all. And
I was going to ask, is it like a set menu? So dessert is part of the menu?
It's included. So by coming in the door, dessert is part of the package.
I'm literally coming in the door like tomorrow. That is like my idea of heaven, because I always want dessert. I always want to try everything. I hate sharing with people, but I would get my own plate of everything.
Yes. And part of the joy of it is if you dine with us a few nights in a row, the desserts change every night. So though it's the same trolley, everything that's on it is different. So, there's always something for everyone. And I just love when people try a little bit of everything. To talk about menu planning for a second, we plan the desserts. So the 5 items, they complement each other. So that if you have them all and you have a little bit of each on your plate, they sit so well side by side. And when you eat them, they're well together. Or even if you just had 2 of the things, they're wonderful. So soon we'll be poaching rhubarb. It's going to pair so nicely with praline ice cream. I'll make sure they're on the same night. You get the idea.
Yes, and I love the idea. Tell us about this Carrageen Moss dessert, because I read about it everywhere and I love the story in the book. So just tell the listeners about it.
Yeah, the name Carrageen, that word means little rock. Carrig is the Irish word for rock. If you put een on the end, it means little. So first, a lovely name. This is the seaweed that grows in the little rocks along the shore of Ireland. You'll find it down the west coast of Europe, in fact, but the Irish were using it for so long that the Irish name has stuck internationally. So we collect the seaweed from just below the tide line when the tide is out, usually during spring tides in June or July. That's the optimum. And it grows in the little rock pools. The seaweed itself, it's about the size of a closed fist. So we carefully remove pieces of the seaweed from the rock, usually lay it out on neatly cut grass or on a cliff top. The sun dries it, and after the first rainfall, it washes the seaweed, and that's a natural way of bleaching and preserving the seaweed. So then we take it inside, and it actually keeps for years. So you can have a bag of this hidden in the pantry and pull it out whenever you need it. To make the dessert, we soak the seaweed in water, simmer it in milk, and when the milk cools, it'll set. Now, the more seaweed you use, the firmer the set. And we sweeten it very lightly and add a drop of vanilla. And it's a wonderful, delicate dessert. It has a scent of the sea. We love to serve it with any fruit compotes that are in season. Or my favourite way to have it is to make an Irish coffee sauce. So think caramel, which you've put a good splash of Jameson or whatever Irish whiskey you like, and some strong coffee into, and you get this whole Irish coffee vibe. Oh my God, it's so good.
Yum. Oh my gosh. So tell us about your incredible Ballymaloe cookbook.
People were suggesting to me for a while that maybe a book could be a good idea, and I couldn't get my head around what this book might look like. And for anyone who works professionally in kitchens, you spend a lot of your time in the kitchen. So even the idea of, when would I write the book, and, what is this book? So it sat on the back burner for a while. But Hazel Allen, the general manager of Ballymaloe House, 10 years before I came to write the book, asked me would I do something. Her original idea was maybe 10 recipes that we could staple together. And we'd leave them on a table in the front hall of Ballymaloe House. So the guests, the residents who had stayed with us and they're checking out, they might pick it up as a souvenir. And I think I was very busy that week and I never got around to it. Anyway, another year passed, and then she said, maybe that little pamphlet we were thinking of, maybe it could be a little booklet of some sort. Still didn't do anything, couldn't get my head around it. Then the next year, I had helped with a book project in Ballymaloe, and Hazel said, well, maybe it could just be a little book. So you get the idea. The ambition was growing and the encouragement was there, but I didn't feel I was an author, and I wasn't sure what the narrative was. Anyway, by that point, I had begun to imagine what the book could be like, and Mrs. Allen had passed away at this point, and I, in retrospect, could realise the great experience I had with her, and I wanted to thank her. And she had taught me to appreciate this repertoire of recipes and style of cooking that it's very easy to overlook. Simple, old-fashioned things that make people and the family feel loved. And so I could suddenly realise there was something in a book in the content that I had been gathering. So I met a literary agent, we crafted a book proposal and handed it out. And I got an offer. So the next thing I was writing a book.
I also love, it seems so full circle to me in light of Dorina giving you that copy of her book when you were just 4 years old. And then many years later, you're producing a book for the place that she loves and has.
Oh, it's still a pinch me moment for me. I never imagined I'd be writing a book that would become part of the Ballymaloe body of work. So the book is called Ballymaloe Desserts for anyone who hasn't seen it.
I've heard it described as like a guidebook for how one gets through the seasons, or how you get through the seasons at Ballymaloe.
Yeah, it's essentially, I think of it as the collection of essential recipes we use every year. There's other things we do as well. Many of the recipes, I call them blueprints. So you could take the fruit tart, for example. It's like a double crusted pie with 2 different pastries. So a really fun thing. But you can make 10 different tarts from that. It depends what you have on hand. Or, there's ice creams that you make a base and, suddenly you can go in 8 different directions. And that's how we cook in Ballymaloe. And we've come up with base recipes that we know work really well with the cream and the eggs and the butter and everything that we have. And then after that, it's a matter of, what direction are we moving in? So the book it's sort of written with that in mind. And these are the recipes we really use. So these aren't recipes that were concocted for a book. These are recipes that are tried and tested. They actually really work. And some of them have been in use for over half a century in Ballymaloe. And it's very much a shared thing of recipes I'd inherited, recipes that evolved with me, but also things that have been perfected before my time. So the book's a celebration of the department and the place where I work. Yeah, and it's a thank you letter to Mrs. Allen for, lighting the spark.
How did you decide how to come up with a table of contents, the way that you divide the book up? Was that sort of your idea? Was that something that came from the publisher?
It came very naturally, actually. I used the categories that we use in the pastry kitchen in Ballymaloe. I broke things down into cakes, pastries, meringues, ices, and then we put those chapters in order of the more basic recipes, like fruit compotes and salads, going into the more advanced things. So towards the end of the book, you can do a deep dive into pastries like the Éclairs, but using different types of pastries in different dishes, and then onto cakes and gâteaux and things that would be a little bit more of a project. So in the book, there's some wonderfully simple things, puddings that you can bake in a single dish, perfect for the family. And then there's Saturday afternoon projects where you can really deep dive into the world of pastry. So I hope if anyone's looking for a special gift or a treat for themselves, the book is available everywhere books are sold.
Well, what's wonderful about it, too, is it means that anyone can buy it. Somebody who's a professional baker can buy this book and bake from it, but you could also be sort of a novice and just learn as you go.
Yes, totally, yeah. And one of the details of the book that I'm very proud of, just to mention, is I cooked and styled all of the pictures myself. So using the recipes in the book. So there was no outsourced studio or anything. So if you do follow the recipes and you look at the images, you can land on that result. I hope anyone who gives some of the recipes a go has a lot of fun with them.
Well, also there's the beautiful photography. I met your photographer when
Oh,
you
Cleena!
when you and I
Oh,
met for the first
I
time.
have to mention Cleena Prendergast,
Yeah.
a dear friend of mine in Ireland and one of the country's most talented photographers for food and interiors and portraiture. But to get to work with a friend like that on a project like this, it was very intimate. It was the two of us. I cooked and styled, she photographed, and we broke the photography for the book into 7 different photo shoots, and we did it over a 4-month period because we needed the produce to be on hand. We couldn't do a strawberry dish without the best strawberries in it. So each thing, as we did it and cooked it and shot it, we tried to make sure it really could be the best version of itself with the very best produce. And hopefully some of that shines through. You know,
Yeah.
people might notice it.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful book. And then I was just curious, when we think about the recipes themselves, JR, are some of them, you've been working at Ballymaloe for so long now, but some of them are JR recipes that you brought with you, and some of them are Myrtle's recipe. Like,
Yeah,
how does
they
it,
are. So,
what's the mix?
so many of the dishes that I inherited, you know, with my role and what I'm doing, and things that Mrs. Allen taught me to do, because we cooked together every day in the kitchen. Mrs. Allen would come into the pastry kitchen. I got to know her in her late 70s, and then she was 94 when she passed away. So we had a good decade where she'd come in each day and we'd cook these old recipes. And she was extraordinary on flavour. She knew how to make things sing. She knew how to use up things that other people would have discarded, but turn it into something that was just as important as premium ingredient. I learned so much of that from her. And then I was always reasonably good at aesthetic. So together as a team, between her teaching me how to make things taste delicious, and then sometimes I'd say, well, maybe I wonder, could we style it this way today? And so a lot of the recipes between the two of us evolved over that decade. And I loved being able to put a contemporary lens on things that could easily be overlooked, but things that we really love, the desserts that make us most happy, really. So in a way, the point of the book was to shine a light on things that you mightn't always remember are there. So it's not my version of something today where I'm just putting tahini in everything. Love tahini.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Sometimes presenting something in its simplest form, but reminding someone that that's really special.
Yeah.
So that was really the narrative thread through the book. But that's something I learned from Mrs. Allen.
I love that.
Yeah.
I want to talk about chocolate eclairs now. So your eclairs at Ballymaloe are a teeny bit different maybe than traditional because of the creme légère. I would love you to tell us what creme légère is, and also why is that the right cream for your eclair versus just a straight up pastry cream?
Yeah, so with the eclairs, so we bake the choux pastry into the traditional shape, and sometimes we do fill them with just chantilly cream or creme chantilly, a sweet vanilla cream. But over the years from playing around, I love to fill them with creme légère. And what creme légère is you make a pastry cream. It's a very stiff custard thickened with, it can be cornstarch or flour. You can sub them in or out in the recipe. And you fold whipped cream into it. So you end up enriching the cream with the flavour of the pastry cream. You end up lightening the pastry cream with the air that's in the whipped cream. And you end up with this really kind of like magical territory. And when you've got that lovely custardy cream inside the crisp pastry, it complements the chocolate glaze really well. I think in America, there's that cake cross Boston cream pie, you know, where it hits on that chocolate custardy note. So you're kind of like tiptoeing into that sort of flavour thing. It's really good. But I've also filled eclairs with sweet vanilla cream, also delicious. But yeah, no, if you want to push the boat out, definitely creme légère is the way to go.
Is chantilly cream, how is that different than whipped cream?
So in Ireland, often when we're serving whipped cream, to start off, we have really wonderful quality cream and it's very flavourful. And we'll just whip cream plain and serve that plain, unsweetened, unflavoured cream with many of our desserts. In Ballymaloe, we love to do that. It'll go on the Carrigan moss pudding. It'll go beside the apple pie. It'll go with the fruit comps, everything. If you add vanilla and sugar to that whipped cream, it then becomes chantilly cream. And you can serve that with desserts too. But in Ireland, at home, we generally prefer to serve a plain cream as an accompaniment. But if it's going to be used as a layer, like in a gâteau or a cake, then we add the vanilla and sugar.
I know that you like a slightly less sweet, shiny chocolate glaze on your eclairs.
Yes.
And yours are actually made with egg yolks. So I had a couple of questions. I think you had written that typically it would be like a fondant frosting on.
Yeah, there's many different frostings you'll find around. Often in the shops in Paris, it'll be fondant based. There's a lot of sugar going in there, and powdered sugar and things, to get texture. And some people put glucose and trimoline, which is a genre of ingredients I don't really use because I'm an old-fashioned girl when I'm cooking. So this particular glaze I love because you don't add any extra sugar but what's in the chocolate. So I pick a chocolate that's between 60 and 70% cocoa solid. So we call it bittersweet. It's not too dark, it's not too sweet. You melt the chocolate with some butter and water, and that becomes almost like a ganache in the bowl. And then crack in 2 large eggs and beat it. And lo and behold, it becomes this wonderful glossy chocolate glaze. And when it cools, it becomes almost a little bit chewy and fudgy. So you need great eggs for this, of course. While it's warm, it's a coating consistency. So you can dip the eclair in, let the little extra drip come off, invert it the right way around so the chocolate glaze is facing up. And yeah, it's great.
Is there a name for a chocolate glaze with an egg yolk in it?
I actually don't know what the name for it is, but if anybody knows, let us know.
Please tell us,
Yeah.
because I'm obsessed with it now. Because I love that kind of chewy chocolate. Ganache can be not finicky, but I love the idea of the eggs bringing in this unctuousness.
Yeah, you get this interesting slight chew to it when it says, and the joy then is that if you want a second eclair, you can have it because they're not too sweet. Maybe another note on the choux pastry is that I don't put any sugar in the choux pastry.
Yeah.
So the choux pastry recipe I use, it can be sweet or savory, but there is salted butter in it. That's very important. That pinch of salt heightens the flavour of everything. So I'd use the likes of Kerrygold, I think that's available here. It's great, brings a great flavour to the pastry. But not having sugar in choux pastry, when you bake it, and this is something I've learned through experimenting, gives you a crisper pastry. A lot of choux pastry recipes have some sugar in it. They'll colour faster in the oven. Sugar translates to colour.
Yeah.
But then when you cool the pastry, it's not as completely crisp. If you want choux pastry that's absolutely crisp, leave the sugar out and you'll have a crisper shell.
All right, so first things first in the recipe, we would make the creme légère because we need it to come to room temp anyway. So would that be our first component that we would make?
Yeah, so I'd make the pastry cream first.
Right.
That can sit in the fridge, and whether the whipped cream is folded in earlier on or closer to filling time, but get the pastry cream made and cooled.
Perfect.
So that's done.
So first we'll make our pastry cream. We're going to place milk, which I assume is always whole milk.
In the pastry cream. Oh,
Yep,
yes.
Yeah, so we're going to place some whole milk and a vanilla pod. If we're using, you can also use extract, but we're hoping you're going to use a pod.
Yeah, great if you can get it.
And is there a brand of pods? Where do you get your pods from?
We get my vanilla dealer. He's a guy called Patrick in London, actually, and he works with a company called Eurovanille. And I have seen it here in the US. It's an organic vanilla. I've seen it in Manhattan. I've seen it in SOS.
Yeah.
That great store that has all those lovely ingredients. But you'll see it around. But so generally, a minimum, it's good to go organic with vanilla.
So we're going to combine whole milk, a vanilla pod, and we're going to put those into a heavy pan. What should we picture? Is it like a copper pot? Is it just...
I generally use a stainless steel pan for this because if the milk does catch to the base of the pan, very easy to clean it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. And we're going to place this on medium heat and bring to just below boiling point. So almost like a simmer?
Yeah, so you might see a few bubbles coming around the edge of the pan. You don't want the milk to expand and flow over. That's a problem.
That's never fun.
And you also, it should be just at that scalding, just below boiling point.
So we'll remove the pan from the heat and we'll allow the vanilla pod to infuse the milk for about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Then we'll place egg yolks in a separate bowl with some castor sugar. When you say castor, we call it superfine sugar.
Yes.
So if we wanted to make this at home, we either buy superfine sugar or grind up our granulated sugar in a blender or something?
Yeah, so we call it castor sugar in Ireland and the British Isles, but exactly superfine sugar here, the same that you'd use in making a cake. The advantage of it being a finer grain sugar is that it'll dissolve much quicker into the liquid, so you're really setting yourself up for success. And I suppose the good thing about sugar of all ingredients, it's never going to go off. So probably worth having a bag in the press if you're going to do some of these things.
And then we're going to mix the egg yolks and the castor sugar together until the mixture sort of lightens and maybe gets a little fluffy, lightens in texture, right?
Exactly.
Is there a particular kind of whisk you like to use, a particular type?
Yeah, I like to use a balloon whisk, one that is, an appropriate size for the job, because sometimes you're scaling a recipe up, so you've got to scale the equipment to bigger bowl, but a bigger whisk. So yeah, something that's comfortable. Yeah, a balloon whisk I love for that.
And now we're going to add flour, which is all-purpose flour.
Yes.
Or we could add cornstarch if we want it to be gluten-free.
Exactly.
And we do this because that will preclude the curdling, to have a little bit of the flour.
Exactly.
And we'll also, when the mixture's boiled, and we'll also thicken our mixture so we have a little bit of oomph.
Yeah, it thickens, it stabilizes, it adds body. Yeah, so the small amount of flour plays a very important role.
Perfect. And then a pinch of salt. Do you guys like to use kosher salt? Do you use fine sea salt?
We generally use fine sea salt for everything. And in this case, generally when you have anything with dairy or starches, a little salt heightens the flavor. If you've ever had bread without salt, it's pretty bland, And in this case, the little bit of salt, it helps the milk to taste more milky.
And so we'll whisk that all together thoroughly. If we've used our vanilla pod, we'll remove it from the milk and scrape the tiny seeds into the milk. Or if we're using extract, we would add that to our milk now.
Exactly.
And then we're going to pour that warm infused vanilla milk into our egg mixture. You say it's very important to do it gradually.
Yep. Well, it's a nicer process when you do it gradually because the egg mixture is a little bit moussey and thick and the milk is thin and watery. So it's nice to introduce the two slowly. Also, you're putting something very hot into something with eggs. You want to remove all risk that you might have any little strands of egg that might just curdle. You can sieve it out later. There's always ways of saving something when it doesn't go exactly to plan. But yeah, for success, it's better to bit by bit.
So we're going to whisk thoroughly until it's all combined. And then we're going to put all of this into a different pan from the one we've been using.
Yeah.
Is it a different stainless steel pot, essentially?
Sometimes I'll rinse out the pot I have.
Yep.
I suppose the objective there is just to make sure that there's no residue on the pan because that might cause sticking later and that could be a little bit tricky.
Yep.
So yeah, nice to have a nice clean pan going back in.
Perfect. So we can clean the one we used, we can grab a different one, and then we'll place on medium heat and we'll stir continuously or whisk continuously. And then you say to scrape across the bottom and into the corners of the pan just to prevent the custard from sticking as it cooks, and you suggest a flat-bottomed wooden spoon to help you really feel.
Yeah,
Tell me about using that tool, and what am I picturing? What's a flat-bottomed spoon?
Yeah, so it has the end of the wooden spoon, the spoon part of it is flat instead of curved, meaning when you press it against the base of the pan and you move it around, it has complete contact with it. And as it moves, it'll stop the milk from sticking in any one place. And then if you're suspicious that, one side of the pot mightn't be getting enough attention because you're stirring from the right side or the left, the corner of the spoon, you can get it in there really quick.
So is it almost angled? Is it almost bent at the bottom where the spoon part is?
It can be. Sometimes they're slightly angled.
Yep.
Sometimes they're, you get the right angled, but they'll all work well once you keep that flat side flush with the base of the pan.
Yeah. The custard will gradually thicken as it approaches its sort of boiling point. About how long? I mean, I know it depends on what volume you're doing.
Yeah, it depends on the heat source and a few things, but that part usually takes about 5 minutes, because the milk was hot going into the eggs, that the temperature drops. And then you put it back onto the heat and you're stirring it. So you're releasing a bit of heat by stirring it a lot.
Yep.
So the temperature climbs slowly. The next thing, it'll start to bubble on the base of the pan.
When the custard starts to boil, we're going to reduce the heat slightly
Yeah.
and maintain a simmer for about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And this is very important because it's right now that the flour in the custard is actually cooking out, and we're going to get our changed texture slightly. It'll become silkier and shinier, and we don't want it to taste floury. You can't just assume, oh, it boiled, I'm done. You have to boil it or keep it simmering for about 2 minutes to kill that flour flavor.
And if you don't have a flat bottom wooden spoon, you can use a whisk at this point as well. It just depends on if the whisk will get into the corner of the pot. That's really the fear. But when it starts to boil, if it hasn't stuck at that point, it's actually much less likely to catch your stick after that. And cooking it for the 2 minutes, interestingly, by the time you get to the second minute, it goes from being thick and the texture visibly changes just a tiny bit. It goes slightly glossier. It moves in a slightly different way. So if you make it a few times, you'll twig that moment. And that's really what you're looking for. It takes about 2 minutes.
Love. So now we're going to remove the pan from the heat, pass the thick custard through a sieve.
Yeah, always a good idea.
Yeah, do you do that even if you don't think?
I do, because sometimes even from the vanilla pod being in the milk, there might just be like a strand of vanilla pod. you know what it is.
Yeah.
But your friend the guest you're serving
Yeah.
the eclair to might think there's like, why is there a fiber? And so it's great to remove any of that. Just so you've got super silky, super clean mixture.
And is there a type or sieve? Like, should we picture like the kind of the pointy cone shaped one?
Yeah, you could use either for this actually.
Okay.
Yeah, just a nice fine sieve.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll sieve into the bowl. Do you like a glass bowl? Do you like a ceramic bowl? Like, what is JR
Yeah,
using?
once it's heat proof, because this mixture is boiling.
Okay.
So I wouldn't pick my finest pottery for this. Yeah, a metal or a glass bowl is just perfect.
And then we'll press a piece of parchment paper against the surface of the custard to prevent a skin. I usually see it written as a piece of plastic wrap.
Yeah, and most people do that.
Yeah.
I just try to cut down on the plastic.
I love that.
Yeah, we're just in a world now where we have to cut out the
I
plastic.
know, but that's so smart.
And in some ways it's so difficult, but every little bit.
Yep.
Yeah. Or I've even actually used a butter wrapper.
Yeah.
Because the butter wrappers have that non-stick coating on the
Yep.
inside. You can press it and it also does the trick.
Yep. Well, that's another good
If
tip.
you want to be very thrifty.
JR, you're dropping a lot of good tips. So then we're going to allow it to cool. Can we cool it to room temperature on the counter and then use it right away? Or do you like to get this into the fridge to chill?
You can. I leave it cool on the counter room temperature just so that I don't warm up the fridge.
Right.
And ideally, before we're going to move on and use it to fill the eclairs, because there's whipped cream going in, great if it's chilled. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. So now we're going to set that aside and we're going to make our choux pastry. So we're going to heat our oven. For us, it's about 400 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
We're going to line a baking sheet. Is there a baking sheet type?
I have a few different ones I use. I love a really thick, heavy baking sheet. Thinner sheets, sometimes when they hit a lot of heat in the oven, they can bend a little.
Yeah.
And for something where you've got a lovely little light eclair, it's just going to roll down the hill.
Yeah.
So, something really thick
And does
is
yours
good.
usually have sides on them?
The larger ones I have do have sides, and the smaller ones I have don't.
Oh,
and actually,
interesting.
I find that with this, you can use either.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're going to line it with parchment paper.
Yeah.
And then we're going to place some water and some cubed salted butter. I thought this was fascinating because, here we almost always write recipes for unsalted butter.
Yes, I know.
Would you say that in Ireland, and maybe it's true in England too, would you say that every single recipe you do has salted butter, regardless?
Mostly. And it's interesting the effect it has. So on the continent in Europe, so we're thinking France, Spain, Italy, where so many of the traditional things we're used to, the laminages, all these things originated, were made with unsalted butter. And they taste distinctively of where they're from when they're made with that butter. And if you take one of those recipes and make it where I'm from in Ireland with the Irish salted butter, it suddenly tastes like it belongs more where we are. So you can make a shortbread in France with unsalted butter. You can make a shortbread in Ireland with salted butter. They taste very different.
Mm-hmm.
One tastes Irish and one tastes French.
Mm-hmm.
So the tradition in Ireland, because we have such a rich history of making butter, all the butter used to be salted. And a little sidebar, actually, Cork, where I'm from, the agriculture region where most of the milk is produced is nicknamed the Golden Vale. And so much butter was made at the end of the 18th century in that region that the butter bank in Cork City, yes, there was a butter bank in Cork City, could regulate the world price for butter by releasing it to the market through Cork Port. So this will tell you the tradition of butter in Ireland. This is a real thing for us. And so all of this salted butter was the fat of our land, not like the unsalted butter you'd find in Normandy or wherever else. So we love to put it into the cakes and the pastries and in choux pastry, and you get a flavour that feels really like it belongs.
So we're going to place the water and the cubed salted butter into a pan over medium heat. Again, just a stainless steel situation.
Yeah.
Over medium heat until the butter melts, and then we'll bring the mixture to a rolling boil. So do we turn up the heat once the butter melts to bring it to the boil, or do we keep it on that medium heat and just wait till it boils?
Yeah, I usually just keep it on a medium heat. You don't want it to start boiling with cubes of butter that have not melted. So once it reaches boiling point, you've then got to act fast with the next step. So keeping it on a medium heat means the butter will definitely be melted.
Why
by
is
the
it
time.
bad for it to boil before the butter melts?
So like all pastries, the proportion is really important of how much egg is in proportion to flour, how much flour is in proportion to water, and how much and the butter, etc. So if it boils for a minute or two or your back is turned, you evaporate the water and suddenly you've less water in the end pastry and it mightn't work. So I think that's one of the bits with choux pastry that people might get caught out on.
Yeah.
So it's a job. I stand by the pot, medium heat, and once we see it come to simmering point, then we move on to the next
That's
step.
such a smart tip. I think people get into trouble a lot with browning butter because they don't understand that they are actually losing
Oh, yeah. There's
the water
evaporation
from
as
the
well.
butter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's many processes going on.
Yeah. So interesting. Now we're going to remove the pan from the heat once we get to that rolling boil immediately.
Yes.
We're going to add strong flour to the pan. Strong is our bread flour, correct?
Yeah, so this would be a high protein
Yep.
flour. We call it strong flour at home in Ireland. Yeah, here, something you'd use for bread. If you're looking at percentage protein, it's like the 13 or
Yep.
higher is good.
Yep.
And the reason we like a strong or high protein, high gluten flour is that extra percent or two of gluten makes a dough that's slightly more elastic. And the magic of choux pastry is that it expands a lot as it bakes. And if the dough has more elasticity, it can tolerate the stretch. You get a better surface, you get a better shape, and it traps more steam because unlike a lot of pastries, choux pastry is steam powered. You've got all that water and egg in the pastry, and in the heat of a hot oven, that turns to steam, and you go from having a ball of pastry that's the size of a hazelnut to something that actually, it's a pastry ready to eat. And that's the magic of it, yeah. So strong flour all the way.
So we're going to stir vigorously with a wooden spoon. Is there a type?
For this, a normal wooden spoon
Yep.
I like. Yeah, it could be flat-bottomed, it could be round-bottomed.
Yep.
Either will do.
And we're going to stir vigorously until the mixture comes together and pulls away from the sides of the pan and sort of
Yeah.
forms a ball.
That takes about a minute, yeah.
We're going to return the pan. So we've done this off the heat. We have taken our mixture off the heat as soon as it got to a rolling boil.
Yeah.
We've added our flour off the heat
Yes.
and sort of stirred off the heat until it pulls away from the sides of the pan to form a ball.
Yeah.
Then we return the pan to medium-low heat,
Yeah.
stirring constantly until the mixture, I love this, starts to fry or
Yeah.
stick.
Or
And
fur, we say, yeah.
Fur.
It begins to, you get it, so the flour's gone into the liquid, you've beaten it together, yeah, the pot goes back in the heat, and over that next minute, whilst you're beating the pastry, number one, you're creating the texture. You want you're mixing everything really, really well. That's very important. But you're keeping it hot for that time. And that's also part of the process of ending up with a good choux pastry. And it'll stick ever so slightly in a layer to the base of the pan. But that's actually part of this process. It's a time-honored way of doing it. It's not
Yeah.
something I invented, but it's something I've inherited.
Yeah. And we do that'll take about a minute. And I
Yeah.
thought this was so interesting, JR, because I feel like it's different. It's definitely different than my own choux recipe. I thought it was interesting to add the flour off the heat.
Yeah,
Is
I do
that-
that because I find when the liquid is boiling, if the flour goes in, it can sometimes jump around a bit, some can fall out of the pot. By taking it off the heat, just for that 20 seconds it takes to add the flour and begin to mix it, or maybe a little longer, you give yourself a bit more control.
Yeah.
So I think
But you do mix the flour in until it's thoroughly combined and then return it.
Yeah, and then return to the heat. And we're really beating it at that point
Yeah.
to make sure everything, without doubt, is thoroughly combined and it has a completely even texture at that
Yep.
point.
Now we're going to remove it from the heat and transfer the hot dough to the bowl of an electric stand mixer
Yeah.
fitted with the paddle attachment. We're going to mix on low speed until it's cooled. Now, this is just a selfish query of my own because I have a gougere recipe and I actually just do this part by hand. I don't put it in the stand mixer. Is that a problem?
No, and if you're doing a small quantity,
Yeah.
you can do it by hand. What can happen is if the pot's just come off the heat and someone goes straight for it, the pot can sometimes be so hot you scramble a little bit of egg.
Yeah.
So you do have to wait the cooling time. I'm a little impatient sometimes.
Yeah.
If you put the choux pastry into the stand mixer and start mixing it on low speed, it cools down a bit
much
quicker.
faster. Yeah.
And if you decide to scale the recipe up because you want to make more, the mixer gives great consistency. It means that you're really watching the texture while you're doing the next step, which is adding the egg.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have egg in one hand and a spoon in the other, and you
Yeah.
get great judgment with the mixer.
It's basically we're trying to, we want to lower the temperature of the dough before we add the eggs.
Yeah,
Hence the
yeah.
stirring.
It can be pretty warm, but you don't want it to be
Yeah.
like literally the egg to steam as it's hitting the
Yeah.
dough. Yeah.
So we're going to crack eggs into a bowl and beat them together. You like to add them, whether it's a stand mixer or we're doing it by hand. When you add them, you want them all ready to be mixed
Yeah,
up.
I like to give it its best chance. So if
Yep.
I've already beaten the egg before it goes into the dough, half the mixing is already done. Whereas when I made choux pastry before I went to Ballymaloe as a kid from books, you'd crack a whole egg in on top of the
Yeah.
pastry and you'd be chasing the yolk and the white around the
Yeah.
bowl, and then some bits would be more white dissolved and some bits
Yeah.
would have incorporated more yolk. I think once you try it in the method where you whisk the eggs first, you'll never really go back.
Yeah. We're going to crack the eggs into a bowl, beat those together, and then with the stand mixer running on low speed, we're going to gradually add the eggs just to warm our dough in small amounts. and we'll wait for the beaten egg to be fully incorporated before we add more.
Yes.
When 3/4 of the beaten eggs are added, we'll then just start to add the remainder little by little because you might not need all the eggs.
Yeah, so this is the ambiguous territory. Did some of the water evaporate? There's these things where you can't measure that, but it could have happened. Or maybe your large eggs aren't as large as normal. Or maybe, one of them is a whopper. We have eggs that come in from the farm of Ballymaloe and we don't grade them. They're laid that morning and, you get what nature gives you. So it's really the reminder is that end part of the process where you're adding the egg, that's when you use your judgment.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, you say use just enough eggs to make a shiny and smooth dough that drops smoothly from the paddle attachment. So what are we picturing, like a thick chocolate sauce or ketchup?
Thicker than that, yeah. So this is not like sauce territory. It's, it very much, when you lift the paddle out of the bowl of choux pastry, it'll take like 5 or 6 seconds and the pastry begins to move slowly off the paddle. And when some falls, what remains in the paddle often forms quite a nice V shape. It shouldn't be so stiff that it's raggy.
Yep.
And it shouldn't be so loose that it just slipped off. And that's a really nice indication. So the pastry will be glossy and shiny, ultra smooth, but has just enough resistance to hold on for a little bit, and then it falls off.
Yeah, you say the dough should be just thick enough to hold the shape when it's piped.
Yeah.
And we should resist the temptation to add any more beaten egg, because too much egg will make it too loose, and then the pastry will probably maybe expand a little, but not as dramatically as we want.
You lose the shape when it bakes. Sometimes they're more prone to collapsing.
Yeah.
That's what's happened to me in my own experience.
Yep.
You'll get a flatter, if you're baking them into, I'll say, a profiterole shape, and you want to be beautiful, round little sphere, you'll have a very squatty little shape to it, or an éclair mightn't be, as fluffy as you want it.
And that's all due to a little bit too much egg.
Yeah,
That's so
and if you don't have enough egg, you tend to get many more cracks in the surface of the pastry because it's a little drier going into the oven, and in the heat of the oven, a crust forms even quicker than you want, and then those crusts break, and you end up with these kind of things that look like cabbages. Yeah.
So we're going to fill a canvas piping or pastry bag. Is there a brand that you like?
The one we use is French. It's Matfer. And I like canvas bags because you have great grip on them.
Yes.
And I wash it out and use it again.
Yep.
I know there's lots of people use disposable ones, but I suppose my own angle is nothing is really disposable in the world. If you're deciding to use it once and you're dumping it, it's going somewhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't disappear.
It's true.
So all these little things add up. Yeah. So and a canvas bag is really nice to use.
Do you wash a canvas bag like in a dishwasher, or do you wash it by hand?
I wash it in soapy water.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then open it up and let it sit somewhere warm and it dries out. Yeah.
So we're going to fill a canvas piping or pastry bag fitted with like a 1/3 of an inch round tip. We'll fill it with the choux pastry, and then we'll pipe the dough onto our prepared baking sheet with the parchment paper. We'll pipe our dough into 4-inch strips, leaving about 1.5 inches between each éclair because they do expand. The egg wash is not essential. I thought that was interesting because we're going to egg wash these. Why isn't it essential?
So in the case of turning them into chocolate éclairs, they're going to be coated in chocolate.
Right.
So the egg is really a veneer on the top. Whether you egg wash it or not, for the most part, the pastry will bake very, very similarly. So you might be breaking an extra egg to egg wash them, and then you're going to cover it. So save the egg.
Yeah.
That's, I suppose, the sensible thing to do. But if you're making choux pastry where later on you might want to sprinkle it with powdered sugar instead of chocolate, having that shiny top might make all the difference.
So the egg wash is just for color, really, here.
So it depends on where you're going after
because
baking.
I would just think that with an éclair, even though the chocolate is on the, and I've never seen a Ballymaloe one, but even though the chocolate's on the top, maybe the color of the choux on the sides.
So you could do. So it's sort of optional.
Do you?
I usually don't.
Okay.
And no, it's not the making or breaking of it. So it's an optional step, and you may just feel that, it's not necessary to dirty another bit of equipment.
And I also love that your egg wash has a teeny bit of salt in it, because mine does as well. Just an egg with a little salt, it breaks down the white.
The smallest pinch. And it's amazing.
Yeah.
It goes so much further. You get a really even coating.
Yeah, and a
this
little
is egg
bit
wash
of
for
flavor.
anything.
Yes, agree. Then I thought this was so interesting. We're going to sprinkle a few drops of cold water over the top of the baking sheet. Is it also on top of the choux itself?
It can. If it touches the choux, it doesn't really matter so much.
But it's mostly you want it on the paper.
Yeah, I just
Why?
Sprinkle a little on the tray. So with the choux pastry, this is going to go into a hot oven, 400, 410, so hotter than you'd be baking cakes at normally. And The objective when baking choux pastry is to get heat to penetrate the pastry as quickly as possible so that the moisture in the pastry turns to steam. If there's a few drops of water on the tray, they'll be the first things to evaporate. They make a little bit of steam in the oven, and this all goes to work towards helping make the right environment. Now, it really depends on the oven. Some ovens have a draft. They let the steam out as it bakes. Some ovens trap the steam in. There's a lot of wiggle room as to whether or not these drops of water will be helpful or not, but I'm all for setting myself up for success. You know, it's like, it's great to have them on the tray. One way or the other, they'll evaporate. And if it's an oven where the steam can accumulate, all the better.
Yeah. I have a fan oven because I have convection. So would it not work in my oven?
Some fan ovens will remove the steam as they bake. Now, I find with choux pastry, actually, I like to turn, if it's a fan oven, turn the fan to its lowest setting, if that's an option.
Yeah.
And if you have what we would call a conventional oven, one that isn't fan assisted, or it could be a gas oven, choux pastry tends to bake nicer in those ovens if there's nothing on it. So this is plain choux pastry. Now, for people who are familiar with working with crackling, that lovely biscuity mix that you put on top of the unbaked choux pastry, it bakes and collapses over the pastry as it expands and gives it this amazing crackly crust. In my experimenting, it bakes better in a fan-assisted oven.
Interesting.
And choux pastry that has nothing on it bakes better in a non-fan
I love
system.
it.
So these are all nuances. You know, it's trial and error testing.
Would this be an example of something, JR, that you added to the recipe, the idea of putting water on the pan, or was that...
Oh, no. I saw May do it that first day.
Oh, my God.
And she literally like wet her fingers and splashed them towards the eclairs. And
JR.
some landed on the pastry, some on the pan. And I remembered it. And you know when you sometimes wonder, like, what's the secret? Why are they so much better when May makes them? And I wanted to emulate it. So even if it's the case that it is or isn't, you know, the secret to the success, it's quite nice to uphold those traditions.
Oh, I love it.
You know, you do it because you were taught to do it that way. And, you know, and if it's no harm and it's fun and there's a nostalgia and there's a sort of preservation of heritage, or, you know, all of those things.
I love it.
I'm a sucker for all of that.
Oh my gosh, me too.
So, you know, to the day I die, I'll be splashing a little water on.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love those things where when somebody asks you why you do it, you're like, because that's how I was taught.
And costs no effort.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think of May, or, you know, and it's these sort of things. Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah.
And so we're going to bake this in the center of the oven for about 20 minutes. Then we're going to reduce the heat to about 350-ish. Bake for another 15 minutes or until the pastry is crisp and golden.
Yeah.
We do not want to be tempted to open the door too soon. You don't do any rotating.
No, not for a long time now. I'm lucky I have a glass panel on the door of my oven so I can see in. Trickier when you don't, I know. So usually the pastry will never be fully cooked before 25 minutes.
Yeah.
It's sort of not possible because, you know, the steam has to get out and there's a lot going on in the oven and the pastry's room temperature, it's heating up. So I wouldn't open the oven before that.
Okay.
And then, you know, you can be gentle, you can have a peep. Usually a little bit of steam will come out and, you know, a second glance you'll learn an awful lot. So if they don't look set and golden, I wouldn't open the door more than an inch at the beginning. Cautious, approach.
You say if the pastry's not crisp sufficiently on the outside, then you risk that the eclairs might collapse when the door is opened.
And it's happened to me many times, you know, and you learn a lesson and then you relearn it. And, you know, that's sort of, there's no better way.
It takes me like many mistakes before I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've learned the hard way with this one,
Yeah. Then we do remove the tray from the oven. So we're at like about 35 minutes.
Yeah.
We're going to make a small circular hole in the underside, the bottom of each eclair with the tip of a small knife, kind of like a paring knife. And we do this so that the steam can escape from the center of the choux pastry. And also so when we pipe the filling into the hole, we have our hole.
You've got an entry point.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to return this to the oven, bake for another 5 minutes to dry out the inside of the pastry. So if we weren't filling, if we were making a profiterole or if we were making gougere, would we not put the hole in because we don't have to put anything? Or would you just make a poke for steam?
If it's something like a profiterole, lovely if it's totally crisp. You could poke just a little hole that'll act as a vent because you're not going to need an entry point for the tip of a piping bag later on. So if it's going to be a profiterole that exactly you cut it across the equator and maybe you're filling it with a ball of ice cream or something, you just want to make sure it's crisp.
Yeah.
Something like a gougere, often the centre is meant to be slightly soft in any case.
So you wouldn't see any need.
And they're being eaten hot from the oven usually. That's the tradition of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So when the pastry inside is crisp and dry, it's ready to remove from the oven and we'll cool it on a wire rack. My idea was your choux pastry is cool, your pastry cream is cool. Do we assemble these two items and then make our chocolate sauce? Or would you make the chocolate sauce right now as the choux pastry cools?
Yeah, so I would like to finish preparing the crème légère So at this
point, you'd add the whipped cream.
This point, add the whipped cream to the pastry cream.
Yep.
So if you take the pastry cream out of the fridge, it sets quite stiff.
Yeah.
So I like to work that for a minute in a bowl on its own.
With a whisk?
It smooths out a little bit. Could be a whisk, could be a spoon. It depends on how much you have,
Okay.
But you can kind of see how you feel the texture is.
Yep.
Working it for a minute, it becomes it'll be still very thick, but it'll be smooth again.
Yep.
Then the cream goes in much nicer.
So I had a question about the cream. When you say whipped cream, I know it's unflavored because then it would be chantilly cream.
Yeah.
But is it stiff peaks? Is it medium peaks? Is it soft peaks? What kind of cream are we?
For this, I'd like the cream to be stiff.
Stiff.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so because though if I was serving whipped cream alongside a pie
you
or
would
something,
never do
lovely
that.
and soft. But
Yeah.
stiff for this is good
Okay.
because the stiff cream goes into the stiff pastry cream.
Perfect.
And it has a good holding consistency.
Perfect. So first step after, while our choux pastry is cooling, we're going to do that final step of the cream, taking the cool pastry cream, folding in the whipped cream. Then we're going to fit another canvas piping pastry bag, as we did with the shoe bag. This time we're going to put a 1/4-inch round tip, or if we happen to have a special Éclair piping nozzle, we will use that. So my question is, what is a special Éclair piping nozzle, and where am I buying one?
What you must. It's almost like a narrow little steel pipe with an angled end on it, like quite a wide syringe almost, and you can put it into the bottom of the piping bag, and because it has length and it's narrow, you can push it deep into something like an Éclair and start filling from one of the ends as you draw the tip back out through the hole that you've made. Does that make sense? You insert it
Yes.
into the pastry,
Yes.
and as you withdraw it, you put pressure on the bag so that whatever cream you have starts filling the pastry. You could use it for filling, so a cream horn, and it's almost that level of eccentricity that the French can
I
achieve
love it, of
in
course.
perfection. So,
and then we all want to copy.
yeah, and many of us will live our lives happily without such things.
So-
but for those of us who have them, it's a treat.
So, but you're still using that hole that you made that's
you're-
in the center. You're not going through one of the ends.
No.
of the Éclair.
And I mean, you could do that, but I'd still use the same hole.
Yeah.
And so that's really more just a nod to, for those, for the 1%.
Yes, I love it. The 1% are our listeners.
Yeah,
so
great.
They're going to like that. So we're going to fill the bag with the cream mixture and pipe it into each Éclair through the hole on the bottom. And is it that kind of thing? I remember learning this, even though I don't do it very frequently, but we know we have enough cream in our Éclair. Do we kind of hold it in our hand and we can kind of feel?
You can feel the weight.
Is that how you do it, or do you just know now?
Sometimes when you're filling, there might be tiny little perforations in the pastry.
Yeah.
Small little holes that just develop during baking. And you'll be putting pressure on the canvas piping bag, the creme légère is going in, and like a tiny bit will spurt out one of the ends, and you'll know it's there.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
This is the nature of a handmade product. You'll get a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But generally, you'll feel the weight of it. You'll know you've squeezed the bag to such an extent that enough cream has gone in. And also, the cream will come out to the hole where the tip of the piping bag is,
then
and that's the sign.
You know you're done. And now we make our chocolate glaze, yes?
Now we make the glaze.
Yes. So we kind of put these aside, or do you don't want to put them in the fridge?
No, at this point, I keep them to one side. You could put them in the fridge, but
I worry they would get not crispy if they were in the fridge.
Yeah, I try to just move straight on at this point.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So now we're going to make the chocolate glaze. Is it essentially semi-sweet chocolate, or is it a little more bitter than? I think semi-sweet is like 60%. This is more.
Yeah, it could be anything in the 60 to 70 territory.
Okay, perfect.
If you go past 70, I know people love dark chocolate things, but it can be detrimental.
Yeah.
You almost lose what is just like immediate chocolate flavor.
Yes.
So it needs to have a little bit of its own sweetness. So something like 62, 64, 66.
Perfect.
Depending what your favorite chocolate is. Yeah, that should work fine.
So we'll place our semi-sweet chocolate, 2 tablespoons of water, and salted butter. We now know it's always going to be salted.
Yeah.
In a heat-proof bowl, set over a pan, like a bain-marie. In a heated bowl, set over a pan of hot water. Is the water simmering?
Yeah, just lightly bubbling is fine, and then the steam warms the bowl.
Perfect. We will stir the ingredients. Stir as the ingredients melt until the mixture's smooth. Then we'll remove from the heat and we'll whisk in eggs. So it's not just yolks; it's actual
the whole eggs.
Amazing.
And this, it's sort of when you haven't done it before, it seems a little peculiar.
Yeah.
So you'll have the warm chocolate mixture,
Right.
and it will be warm.
Yep.
And you crack both eggs in to the mixture, and then go in with a whisk and start beating it. And for a moment, you will wonder, oh gosh, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And like lots of chocolate things, they can go on the cusp of splitting and suddenly it forms the glossy emulsion.
Oh
so
my
that's where a
gosh.
large egg is important.
Okay.
And if it's the case that you think it's a little stiff or you're unsure, add another teaspoon of water. It'll loosen the texture a little.
Perfect.
Warm water. because chocolate things
Are finicky.
Frostings and icings,
Yeah.
they're temperature sensitive.
Yeah.
So if it suddenly got too cool and starts to firm up, you can warm it up a little bit.
Okay.
And that helps for
And
consistency.
do we need to worry about those eggs kind of curdling because the chocolate's hot?
No, the chocolate's warm. So when you melt
Okay.
chocolate, it's not even halfway to boiling point normally.
Yeah.
So it's
It's
yeah.
not- that's not
If the
something to
chocolate
worry
was
about.
hot enough to scramble the egg, you probably destroyed the
Yep,
chocolate. Yeah, you might have bigger problems.
We're going to whisk in the eggs till the glaze is smooth and glossy. And I have a note. Does the glaze with eggs have a name? But we already discussed that.
Yeah, but maybe someone knows of
I
it. Yeah,
know.
I guess when you add any sort of liquid to chocolate,
Yeah.
the general name is ganache.
Yeah.
Because you can, and I've done stages
So
with
maybe it's an
chocolatiers
egg.
different.
Yeah.
And I watched someone make lots of ganaches with tea one time. They'd
Yeah.
make a jasmine tea and blend that
Yeah.
into chocolate with no dairy or anything.
Yes, I've
and
seen that too.
And that was ganache for them.
Yeah.
And then growing up, I learned it more in sort of the butter cream territory. And in this case, the liquid is coming in, butter, water, and in egg form. So I guess it's a kind of
I feel like there's a whole branch of ganache that's a water ganache.
Yeah.
And those are the ones where you use tea or you use coffee. It's so interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like this is, it's a subsection of that because eggs,
Yeah.
are a large portion is water. Of course, is the yolk, which
Yeah.
is great.
I wonder if
Emulsifying
but the
properties.
eggs aren't actually cooked.
No, they're not. So this is where the eggs have to be brilliant.
Yep,
And it,
yep.
it goes back to know where your eggs come from, lovely organic eggs. I mean, I
Yep.
suppose I'm very lucky in that, the hens are, literally in
Yeah.
the field beside me, which is the ideal scenario. But, most people should have access to
Yep.
really good eggs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Then we're going to transfer the chocolate sauce to a dipping bowl. Is there a particular kind of bowl you like for this? I assume you want it to be relatively shallow.
It depends. If the bowl you've made the glaze in has a sort of a flat area in the base of it, and you feel like the glaze you made is at a nice thickness for dipping, just go ahead and use that bowl.
Okay.
But it's good to have something you're comfortable in. So you can pick up one of the Éclairs and just hold it between two of your fingers and check if the Éclair fits nicely into the bowl you're going to use.
Yep.
So that can be something you can think about earlier on.
Yep.
And if the bowl that you needed to use that was heat-proof is too wide or an awkward shape for this, transfer it into something that's really comfortable for the dipping. That'll just make the process nicer.
And
I know it might dirty the bowl, but you'll end
but
up
it's
with
worth it.
You'll have a better finish and the job is easier.
Yeah. Does the glaze need to set at all, or we use it right away?
No, I like to go with it while it's still a little bit warm.
Okay.
So at this point, if you checked the temperature with your finger, it'll be tepid or just above tepid.
Okay.
Now, if it seems like it's quite stiff, check the temperature. And if it seems a little cool, I would place the bowl onto what I was using as the bain-marie or
Yeah.
double boiler. And the little bit of warmth in that water can sometimes just bring it up a degree or two.
Okay.
And that might be all it needs.
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
so you
or
can warm it up a little.
tiny bit of warm water.
Yeah, a teaspoon of hot water or,
Okay.
a little bit more, and that'll loosen it. And yeah.
Perfect. So we're going to hold each Éclair between our thumb and our forefinger and invert the Éclair so the top is facing down and dip it into the chocolate glaze so it covers no more than 1/3 of the pastry. Do you just mean that we don't, Éclairs tend not to have, their ends aren't covered. It tends to be like a
Yeah.
strip along the top side of the shoe.
Yeah, so if you look at an Éclair straight on,
Yeah.
so you're looking kind of down the tube of it.
Yeah.
I like for the glaze to come 1/3 of the way down the side. So it doesn't actually come as far as the widest part.
Yes.
That'll give you
I
a great
see what you
aesthetic.
mean. I
So you
see
can,
what you
So you
mean.
can see a nice border of the pastry around it. Also, as a proportion thing, that's a nice amount of chocolate
Yeah.
for the amount of pastry and cream you have. Now,
So you'd want to make sure you don't dip so deeply
Yeah.
that you get it to the halfway
Exactly.
point. I get that.
Yeah,
I get
exactly.
that.
So, stay clear of the halfway point. I think that's a good tip for getting the right amount on.
Yeah.
And, if you go around the pastry shops in Paris or, the sort of these capitals for pastry, sometimes they'll even only have the glaze. They'll pipe it on a strip on the top. Or it might not even come, a fraction of the way
Yeah.
down. And so that's a styling thing. It depends how thick it is. But for this kind of glaze, yeah, definitely. I think that's
I
where it should
cannot
add.
wait to come to Ballymaloe and eat an Éclair with you.
Yeah. Or let me know when you're coming to
I
Europe
know,
and we'll
I
do
know.
a bakery crawl.
I know. Then we'll lift the Éclair out of the glaze and let any of the surplus drip off before turning it right way up again.
Yes.
Do we kind of just wait until the last we see a droplet, then
Yeah.
there's nothing, then you're good to go?
Yeah, that's usually good to go. Yeah.
And then we'll arrange on a pretty plate and serve. We don't let it set any more than that.
You can do. I have sometimes, you make spare and I've kept them for several hours in the fridge. The pastry starts to soften slightly.
Yeah.
It absorbs moisture from the cream. And,
Yep.
just being in a fridge can
Yep.
be detrimental to pastry. So if you can eat them within an hour, like that's when you're going to dazzle people.
Yeah.
And if you eat them after that, they're going to be really good.
Yeah.
And if you eat them to the next day, it's a bit of a pity.
Yeah.
But they'll still be nice. So it's kind of, you can draw a graph of like, peak pleasure is that first
Down to
hour.
a bit of a pity.
Yeah. I know, for all the work it takes.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to do all these multi-components,
Yeah.
you've made pastry, you've made pastry cream, you've made the glaze. It all takes a bit of work. So these are things I love to do, and I know I can pull it off.
Yes.
And then get them to people. Yeah. And then people will think back to the best eclairs they've ever had, and it'll be the one you've made them.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, JR. And I just want to say that you are my cherry pie.
Oh, thank you. This is really, I'm honored and such a pleasure. Thanks so much, Jessie.
You're so welcome. That's it for today's show. Thank you to Ghirardelli Professional Products for supporting this episode. Don't forget to follow She's My Cherry Pie on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and tell your pals about us. You can find today's recipe at cherrybomb.com. She's My Cherry Pie is a production of the Cherry Bomb Podcast Network. Thank you to Good Studio in Brooklyn. Our producers are Carrie Diamond, Catherine Baker, and Jenna Sadu. Thank you so much for listening to She's My Cherry Pie, and happy baking!